What's up guys, my name is Josh and welcome to the Balanced Amplifier Roundup. Before I talk about the differences between all of these, because that's really the purpose of this roundup, is not to just point out like specs and things like that, because you can read all that on a website. I don't really see the purpose of just reiterating what you can read. We'll talk a little bit about power, but I really want to talk about the differences in sound between all of these devices, but a little bit about them first. This is a Mjolnir 2 by a company called Shit. This is a Shit Jotunheim, same company, but obviously different amplifier. This is an NFB 1 amp from a company called Audio GD, known as Audio God. And then this is probably an amplifier that you've never heard of, being a Soekris 1541. Now this is actually a DAC, primarily, that's really what it's made for, but it's a more than competent amplifier as well. And it does have a balance. It's a fully balanced DAC and fully balanced amplifier. These are all fully balanced amplifiers, actually. This one just happens to primarily be a DAC, but that's what you're paying the 1,500 bucks that it comes in at for. So the NFB 1 amp is mine, and this Soekris was very kindly sent to me by Ryan from Mod House. He's actually the only retailer in America, I think, that actually sells this DAC. So if you're interested, definitely check him out. Huge shout out to him for not only helping with the amplifier portion of this roundup and being able to have a fourth option here, but also supplying the balanced stack that I've been using to test all of these amplifiers on, and making sure that I'm getting the rawest form of each of these amplifiers in my comparison. Another huge shout out to Z-Review, who sent me his personal customized Shit Jotunheim. And then this is actually a friend and a viewer of the show, and I'm using the list tubes for this comparison so that it's entirely solid state, solid state, solid state, solid state. I will have a full review of the Mjolnir with tubes, because it is a tube hybrid amplifier. And I will have a full review of the Jotunheim and a full review of my 1 amp coming out soon. I will not have a full review of this though. Okay, so now let's actually talk about the amplifiers here. So I'm gonna list the power output at 50 ohms for each of these, except for this one. Their website goes like 25, 40, 100, 300, and 600. So at 40 ohms, this puts out about 8 watts, and at 100 ohms, it puts out about 3.5 watts. So 50 ohms, it's gonna be somewhere in that ballpark, maybe around 6 or 7 watts, something like that. The Soekris is actually a fairly powerful headphone amp. It puts out about 3.5 watts at 50 ohms. The Jotunheim puts out about 3 watts at 50 ohms. And the Mjolnir 2 here puts out about 5 watts at 50 ohms. So they're all very powerful headphone amplifiers. I don't have a structure for this, if I'm being completely honest. I kind of wrote out a thing, but I figured I'd just kind of go at it and see what I got. I'm gonna handle these two kind of in the same bracket. And the reason why is because Shit has, to me, a very apparent signature that they tend to like. And Shit is one of those companies where you either love their stuff or you hate their stuff. And I'm kind of more on the love it side. I do really like most of their products. I know that sometimes they do take like the budget option to achieve a goal, but I do end up liking the end result. They have the best build quality on this table, even compared to the 1 amp here. Both of these devices are solid, very, very solid. I'll start with the Jotunheim here. The Jotunheim has the most compressed sound of all 4 of these amplifiers. And by compression, if you don't know what I mean, which I know a lot of you do, but in case you're new and you're curious as to what that means, basically that means that the highest point and the lowest point of your song or a single note, that highest volume and that lowest volume kind of get closer together. And this is also known as dynamics. But when you get into compression or a compressed sound, it kind of closes that dynamic range from being as wide as it could be and kind of tightens it up a little bit. And a lot of modern music is fairly compressed in terms of dynamic range. Now, here's the thing about dynamics. I think audiophiles give it a bad rap. Personally, I think it's a creative style. I think that you have an option to use compressed dynamics or not using compressed dynamics, especially when you're talking about actual music production. And I think it gets a bad rap because it's sort of messing with the music. But in terms of enjoyment, compression may actually be something you enjoy. There's a reason why it's pretty much taken over the music industry, is because in a lot of cases, it is fairly enjoyable to listen to. But that preference is gonna go case by case. There's gonna be a group of people over here who hate compression, and there's gonna be a group of people over here who are either okay or love compression, then some people in the middle who like both, and that's kind of where I sit. And then less compressed but same type of tonality and sound signature is going to be the Mjolnir 2 over here. It's not quite as dynamic as the 1 amp in my opinion, but these are the ship branded solid state tubes, as they call them. And here's the thing about them. I'm not sure how much of the sound is affected by these tubes. I'm not sure if you bought a false tube from another company, like a solid state tube, and input it, if it would change the sound signature. But since these are the ship branded ones in the ship Mjolnir, this is probably the purest example of what they are expecting the sound signature to sound like when it arrives to you. Now the sound gets more nuanced because even though this is a hybrid amplifier, it is fairly revealing for the tubes, not as revealing as a full tube amplifier, but still fairly revealing for the actual tubes that you're listening to. Now these two amplifiers are two amplifiers that I consider to have very little, well, maybe not no, but not perceivable compression to me. I perceive the sound as being very wide open. The THX, which is an honorable mention here, I just do not have it here, unfortunately. I had to send it back because I was on a time constraint for that review, is probably the amplifier that would pull ahead in this roundup. So if you're curious if you should get that one over any of these, probably. It just depends on if you're going for any particular style or flavor or not. So I'll draw a couple comparisons to that off of memory, but I didn't directly compare to all of these like I did with all four of these. I just compared that one to the Jotunheim and to the 1 amp. And there's more information on that THX AAA 789 down in the description below. So compressed sound, slightly less compressed, no compression, and no perceivable compression is what I mean. I'm not sure on the total harmonic distortion on all of these. I'm pretty sure this one's probably the worst, but that one's probably up there for that. But I'll link to the websites down below, so if you're super curious about that stuff, just check it out. Okay, so now let's talk about the characteristics for all these amplifiers. They all have kind of their subtle nuances and their subtle differences that I was able to pick up on, and some of them I like, some of them I didn't like that much. Let's go back to starting with the Jotunheim. The Jotunheim, it's hard to tell what exactly is due to distortion and what is due to that compression factor, but the Jotunheim tends to have a little bit punchier bass compared to all of these. And it just seems to kick a little bit harder, but the resolution in the highs is not really that great. It's not something that I'm particularly fond of on the Jotunheim. I think for resolution, this is number 4, 3, 2, and 1. Now, there's other factors that go into that, like speed. This is a semi-fast amplifier in terms of like the actual impact, so like the instant of delivery. This is kind of like in the middle. This is in the middle. This is kind of in the middle as well. It's not super fast, and this is actually relatively slow. The THX AAA 789, I'm just going to call that the 789 from now on. That is a very, very fast amplifier, and comparing between the Jotunheim and the 1 amp, the Jotunheim was able to be a little bit faster than the 1 amp, though the 1 amp is a very smooth amplifier in terms of its delivery. It's very resolving in terms of detail, but the initial like solid impact is actually a little bit reduced on the 1 amp. And so you end up getting this characteristically smoother sound on the 1 amp that you don't get with the other ones. And that can be very enjoyable. And it's not slow in the sense that you get with like a tube, for example. Tubes generally have this characteristic where they usually don't have the absolute top end resolution, and they usually don't have as punchy like real sub bass area, like below 40 hertz, whereas solid states generally don't have a problem with that. And with that slowness, I actually get a just slightly towards the warmer side of neutral. The THX was slightly brighter than what I would consider neutral. This is just about neutral, actually. There's some other characteristics of it that are not perfect, but in terms of neutrality, it's pretty much up there. Not neutral at all, and not neutral at all, especially if you're running tubes on it. To me, both of these almost sound a little bit V-shaped, just like a tiny bit, just like a little added brightness in the highs and a little bit more like girth and body to the lower end, whereas both of these tend to fill out all the other frequencies somewhat evenly. And the 1 amp actually might even have kind of, I don't know if it's just comparative to all these other amplifiers, but it almost seems like it has a little bit of a mid-range, like a vocal boost. Not boost isn't like a lot, just like I don't know, it's just got something extra in the vocals that seem to come across a bit more forward. It might be separation. Separation is another factor here. Separation is very good on the 1541. Separation was probably the best on that THX AAA 789. Separation is okay on the Jotunheim compared to all these, and separation is actually very, very good in terms of the Mjolnir 2. And I think as far as on this table, I think the 1 amp does the separation the best. Although I think that 789 does beat the 1 amp a little bit there. Now another factor that I was picking up was like micro detail, right? Like the turning pages in like an orchestra, or the shuffling of feet, or the stepping away from a microphone, and you can just hear that subtle distance change, or a door opening way in the background at a live venue or something along those lines. Now this, to me, I consider separate than compression. And with compressed amplifiers, they tend to bring up those micro details to kind of the foreground a little bit more, to where they're a little bit more obvious and a little less true to life to what you would actually hear. But with those little details, I'm listening for position and echo and decay and attack and speed and isolation of those sounds, how they sound compared to the other walls and rooms and people around them. And the two that were the best at displaying that were the Mjolnir and the 1 amp. I didn't really pick up a whole lot of micro detail for the Soekris here, and the Jotunheim brought that micro detail up in volume, but it seemed to lose a lot of the characteristics of like position and separation. Whereas the 1 amp and the Mjolnir here were able to keep that separation and that position very, very accurate to what I would imagine them to be accurate as. I don't have a favorite overall, if I'm being completely honest. I think for specific headphones, each amplifier has a kind of a good headphone for it that I've tried. And of the headphones I've had here, I've had the HE6s, HE1000, V2, HD800s. I tested the single-ended output out of the 1990s, and everything else was balanced. I also have LCD4s and Focal Utopias, and I tested the Alexas on all of these. The 789, for example, was a spectacular amplifier, but I didn't really like the Alex on it. Instead, because the Alex had such great dynamic range as a headphone in general already, I actually liked it on a semi-compressed amp like this Jotunheim here. I also thought it was pretty good on a slightly slower amp, being the 1 amp. LCD4s I didn't like on the Mjolnir, but I did like on the 1 amp, whereas the HD800s I really liked out of the Mjolnir 2 and not so much out of the 1 amp. So they trade blows, and they have headphones that they both work very, very well with. Actually, the HE1000 V2s right over there sounded the best on the Soekris here. So they all have just caveats and little nuances that they either sound like or do that's a little strange, and for certain headphones it can benefit it, for others not so much. It just depends case by case. A lot of it's trial and error. I would say that the most versatile amp here, and I'm trying to be unbiased about this, it's probably the 1 amp. I felt like that was the most pleasing on the most amount of headphones, so this one is probably going to be equally as pleasing for the same amount of headphones, but it doesn't have as much power, so you're not going to be able to drive as many headphones on the Soekris here as you would the 1 amp, just because of the power. The Soekris, in terms of on this table, and even considering the THX 789, this is probably like the middle of the road. I would say in terms of my preference as to what I like, and it does go case by case for headphones, I like every amplifier that I've talked about here. I really, really do. I do love this little Jotunheim. I think it's awesome. The build quality is insane. And for certain headphones, I really like the tonality change that it gives them. I would say that the Jotunheim is probably at the bottom of the list in terms of what I like the most. Then the Mjolnir 2, then the Soekris, then the 1 amp, and then the 789. But all amplifiers here are very, very capable of driving most headphones to a very pleasing degree. It's only when you get into the really fine details when you're going to notice these subtle differences between the amplifiers and really start to pick them apart. Do I think most people, I know not all, but do I think most people would be okay with any amplifier on this table? Certainly. I genuinely do. I think that most people would be happy with the Jotunheim or Soekris or a Mjolnir or a 1 amp. I really do. So check out all of these down below if you're interested. I'm curious as to your guys' questions. Also, if you have any opinions about this. I know there's a lot of people who don't really like the shit sound signature. That's okay. It's all preference. That's all audio is just enjoyment and preference and what you like. And then if you guys are curious about the Soekris, definitely check out Mod House down below, and send a thanks to everybody who supplied amplifiers for this this roundup here. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of hard work. This is probably the video that I did the most total listening time for, I think. Actually, I'm fairly certain, yeah. I've put a lot of hours into the 1 amp and a lot of hours into all of these, but together, switching back and forth different headphones, it was a lot. All right, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Sorry for the disorganization, but just 4.5 if you count the 789. You know, 4.5 different amplifiers talking about different aspects and benefits and drawbacks and things like that. I just couldn't structure. I just had to get out and talk about it. So thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace. Hey guys, before you go, I have a real quick message about my Patreon. If you want to go above and beyond and help support this channel to help pay for shipping and insurance costs so I can review amplifiers and headphones like these a little bit easier, you get to get access to ask me any question you want anytime. You get access to all or most of my videos early, and you also get access to an exclusive Patreon-only monthly video. That's going to be covering everything from my day-to-day life to how I make my videos to the headphones that I'm using on any particular day or that I just wanted to talk about but didn't want to make an official video about, stuff like that. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, there's a link in the description down below. So I think that's enough self-promotion, so have a great day, guys. Peace.